So here's the finished product. This is one wall of a dormer. So you can see up here, we got these angled cuts up here. We got our double top plate going to cross up there. And then at the other end, we have our angles to cut so they match the slope of the roof. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and I'm going to explain and how to do this on the ground without ever going up having to measure anything off of the roof. Okay, in this video I am going to show you how to figure for a dormer wall without having to go up on your roof. Okay, so we're going to figure out all the numbers for this dormer wall without going up on the roof. All right, so what do I need to start this? Well, the first thing, I need two pieces of information. I need to know what the slope of the roof is. In this case, it's going to be a 10-12. And if you convert that to degrees, that's 40 degrees of your roof. I also need to know what the length up the roof is going to be. So in my case, I'm going to use 72 inches. So 72 inches from this point at the very bottom of my dormer to 72 inches, which would be the top of the ridge over here. Okay, so that's 72. Now, to get that number, you can figure out how tall your dormer is going to be based on the slope of your roof, and you can kind of work it to get that number. Okay, so with these two pieces of information, now I'm going to start figuring out numbers for my dormer. All right, so the first number I'm going to find is the total height of my dormer. So what I'm going to use is this trig function. So the first one I'm going to use, since I'm using this degrees, this angle, and I want to find this height, and I have the hypotenuse, so I'm going to use cosine. And that cosine equals adjacent over hypotenuse. So I'm going to take the cosine of this angle, 50 degrees, and multiply it times 72, and that will give me an overall height of 46.28 inches for the overall height of my dormer. Okay? Now, I'm going to find out what my ridge length is. So this time I'm going to use this angle, and I'm going to use the opposite side with the hypotenuse. So now I'm going to use sine. So I have sine of 50 times 72 will give me 55.16 inches. So when I get around to cutting my ridge board, it's going to be 55.16 inches long. And then I'll cut it on a 50-degree angle over there. Okay, so now I have these two numbers. Next thing we have to figure out is the height of the rafters themselves. How high are your rafters going to be? Well, my dormer is going to be 4 feet wide. So down here, I'm going to take half of my span of my dormer. So 4 divided by 2, divided in half, it gives me 2 feet. And I'm going to use a slope of 412 on my dormer roof. So I'm going to take the 2 feet times the 4 inches, and that gives me a total of 8 inches. So my rafters are only going to rise up 8 inches above the top plate. So right here, I have 8 inches. Okay? Now the next number is this number right here. This is 2 inches. Okay? What is that 2 inches? Well, that's HAP. HAP stands for height above the plate. When you figure rafters, you're figuring from the corner of your top plate to your top of your ridge. Okay? But when you cut a rafter, your rafter doesn't sit right there flush with this because it usually has a tail on it. So it sits higher than the top plate. And that's your HAP. And in this case, I'm going to use a HAP of 2 inches. It's going to be a HAP of 2 inches. So that'll give me 1.5 inches for my bird's mouth, and it'll give me 2 inches for HAP. So I have that number over there. So now I have 8 plus 2, so I'm going to get a total of 10 inches above my stud walls. Okay, so here's what I did right here. I take 46.28, which is this number, subtracted my 10, and got 36.28. That's the overall height of my front of my dormer, not including the rafters. Okay, so that number is right there. So it's from the down here at this point to the top of the top plate on the dormer. Now, next thing I want to do is figure out the length of this stud. Well, to figure out that stud, I have to subtract off this top plate, this other top plate, and then I have to subtract off this distance where I have a beveled cut on that bottom plate. Okay, so figure, oh, what's that number? Well, over here, it figures out that number. Okay, so I cut this one at a 40-degree angle, which means I cut off 40 degrees, which leaves me with 50 degrees. So then I'm going to use 50, and I have my opposite side. So using sine, I take 1.5 divided by the sine of 50, which gives me about 2 inches. It's like 1.96 or 1.97, rounded up to 2 inches. So that beveled section there would be 2 inches. So right here you can see where I got 2 inches right there. So all I have to do then is take 3 plus 2 and subtract it from 36, which gives me a total stud height of 31.28 inches from long point to square cut. Okay? Next one we're going to figure is this bottom plate right here. Now, to get that plate length, I'm going to figure out, I don't have, this is the hypotenuse, so I don't have the hypotenuse, so I have to use something else. I'm going to find the hypotenuse, but I have over here, I have the adjacent side. So I'm going to use the cosine because I have the adjacent, I'm looking for the hypotenuse, and I have the angle. So the angle is 50 degrees, and the length of the adjacent side is 36.28. So 36.28 divided by the cosine of 50 gives me a total length of 56 and 7/16 inches. All right. Now to find the length of the stud, I have to subtract off these two beveled parts up there and say, oh, what's the length of those beveled parts? Well, we figured those out too. So we cut those on a 50, so that means I cut 50 off, that leaves me 40. So I take 1.5 or 1.5 divided by the sine of 40, which gives me 2 5/16 inches. I double that to 4 5/8, subtract it from 56 and 7/16, which gives me 51 13/16. So this bottom plate right here will be cut at 51 13/16. Okay, so I've got this length, and I've got the length of this stud. Now all I have to do is figure out the length of this stud. So again, I'm going to use this angle, and then I'm going to use, I'm looking for the opposite side, and I have the adjacent side. So here's the opposite side, the one I'm looking for. I have the adjacent side, and I have the angle. So now I'm going to take the tangent of 50 equals, or multiply it, times 36.28, and that gives me an overall length of 43.23 inches. So from this point right here to that point right there is 43.23 inches. Okay? Now, I need to cut off 3.5 inches for my top plate that's going to run across the front of my dormer to tie both walls together with the front. Okay, so I'm going to subtract off 33.5 inches, which gives me this stud length right there of 39.73. This stud right here is 39.73 inches. Okay, so how do I get the second one? All I have to do is measure from the short point over to here, and that will give me the length of this stud. So I can I can cut this one at the full length, measure the short point to this end. That will give me the length of the next stud to the long point, and then just cut the 3.5 inches off of this plate. So then I have this plate, this plate. I figured out what this one is, 31.28. I figured out this one was 51 13/16. So now I have the frame of my dormer all ready to be nailed together. And then to find the next one, this stud here or this stud here, all I do is pull over here 16 inches on center at the top and the bottom, and then measure from that point to the long point for that. And then for the next one I go over 32 and 32, and I can measure the long point for that, and then whatever length, how many more I need to fill in my sidewalls for my dormer. Okay, so that is how you figure out the lengths of these dormer walls without having to go up on the roof. So you only need to know these 3 formulas right over here, and you'll be able to figure out the entire dormer side. So you make this side and the other side will be just like it. And then in the next video I'll show you how to frame or figure and frame the front dormer. And then we'll do a third video on the rafters that go on top of the dormer. Okay, so it's going to be a 3 video sequence here. So that's how you figure dormer walls without having to climb up on a roof, without having to do any patterns, without having to do any, you know, just jerry rigging it, trying to figure out what it is. Okay.